This is Brew Crime, a craft beer and true crime podcast. I'm Mike.
And I am Beck, and we are your hosts.
On Brew Crime, we each take a true crime story and we pair it with a craft beer.
You can find our show on your favorite podcast apps. If you can't find it, contact us and we'll try to change that.
We can be found at www.brewcrime.com or on Twitter at brewcrime, and also on all the social media platforms for Pacific Beer Chat at Pacific Beer Chat. We can also be found at brewcrime at pacificbeerchat.com.
Join us as we discuss depraved killers, stupid criminals, and likely some completely unrelated tangents.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Over 100 years ago, in a remote rural area along the Lorain County line in northern Ohio, a mean, abusive orphanage owner finally got fed up with the screaming children and lit a match, setting the orphanage ablaze. A horrific fire engulfs the old orphanage, burning dozens of young children alive. Desperate to escape the inferno, the children on the second floor found the stairs blocked by flames. Dreadful screams of the children trapped inside the blazing building are heard by horrified onlookers, powerless to stop the carnage. The deadly destruction continues until the screams finally fall silent, and the only sound that lingers is the crackling sound of the uncontrollable flames. The smoke rises into the night sky, carrying with it the souls of over 100 orphanage children. The building is soon reduced to a pile of glowing embers, with only a remnant of the foundation and stone pillars forever preserved for future generations to happen upon. From the south shore of Lake Erie, this is Great Lakes True Crime. That is the story behind the legend of Gore Orphanage. For over a century, travelers on Gore Orphanage Road have reported strange instances of glowing lights, apparitions, and chilling cries of unseen children. The area is said to be one of the most haunted locations in Ohio. According to the website hauntedhawking.com, people claim to have seen ghosts among the thick brush and poison ivy found today at the few remains of Gore Orphanage in a remote area near State Route 60 in Lorain County, Ohio. Some of the freakish sounds people have reported hearing include ghostly steps on the large slabs of stone from the front porch. Various sounds coming from the floor still laying nestled beneath the many trees on the site. Children's screams banging off a raggedy stone wall. Even more screams coming from an old well made of flat creek stones. A gatepost lingers amongst the forest growth and scattered tree limbs and branches left over from winter storms. And there are other echoes of the site's history, heard in screams and even a haunting child's voice singing a nursery rhyme. Because it was here, legend has it, that old man Gore, the cruel old man who ran the orphanage, killed all of the children living there. And those who dare to drive down the old isolated roads and pause in the stillness say they hear laughter, screams, and voices of children where there are none. The most daring visitors once pulled their cars onto the gravel edge of the roadway, shutting down their engines and turning off their headlights. They'd count to 5 and then flick their headlights on and off 3 times. And then, after waiting for it, they would hear the pitiful, dying screams of orphans who had been locked into the rooms on that cold, dark night by old man Gore. It is said most who came and dared to follow through with the ritual were not disappointed. Frightened, perhaps, but not disappointed. As with most legends, the truth may have been at best obscured over the years. The true tales of the orphanage and the on-site Swift's Hollow Mansion are said to be more haunting than fiction. Over the course of time, 3 terrifying tales from the area have been woven into one horrific legend of torture, fire, and the paranormal. Like many people who grow up in the Cleveland area, the tales of Gore Orphanage are something I just grew up with, particularly if you grew up in the pre-internet era like I did. I heard most of my Gore Orphanage stories on the WMMS program titled Livewire, which I spoke more about in episode 1 of this show. Anyway, what we know is Gore Orphanage was actually called the Light of Hope and opened its doors in 1902 by Reverend Johann Sprunger, a Mennonite missionary and evangelist originally from Switzerland. It was located on Gore Road, which today is fairly heavily traveled, and has been renamed Gore Orphanage Road due to its strong association over the years to its namesake legendary institution. It was originally laid out along the boundary line dividing Lorain County from its western neighbors, Huron and Erie counties. When a surveying error was discovered, a thin strip of land resembling the gore of a dress had to be annexed to Lorain County. Johann Sprunger and his wife, Katerina, moved to the area after their former orphanage in Indiana was destroyed by a fire. Katerina was the daughter of Christian P. Sprunger. Yes, her maiden name was the same as her married name, so that's, a coincidence. There's no verified explanation regarding Katerina's surname being the same as her husband's, but a worker's diary at the former Light of Hope orphanage in Indiana states that the orphanage was run by, quote, brother and sister Sprunger, unquote. It's also been reported that the two were cousins. 3 orphan girls were reported to have perished in the original Light of Hope fire in Indiana. 2 of Sprunger's former Indiana businesses had also ended by fire, and before moving to Ohio, the Sprungers lost a son and a daughter. It seems that their children's deaths sparked a religious fervor among the couple. The new orphanage site, just outside of Vermilion in northeast Ohio, included 4 sets of farm buildings and covered 543 acres of land. An abandoned mansion was also located on the property. The once magnificent Greek Revival house was built in the mid-19th century by Joseph Swift, a wealthy farmer from Massachusetts. Being a mansion, the house had many rooms and was ornately decorated. It had expensive furniture, ornate woodwork, marble columns, and many other lavish decorations. But the Swift mansion was unlucky. Some might even say it was cursed. In 1831, Swift's 5-year-old daughter, Tryphenia, died. 10 years later, Swift's 24-year-old son, Heman, also died. Not long after that, Swift's fortunes dried up as a result of poor investments in the railroad business. He sold the mansion to Nicholas Wilbur, a renowned spiritualist. Many dark rituals and seances are said to have been held regularly in the mansion to contact the spirits of deceased children. In fact, one room of the house was reportedly devoted entirely to the holding of seances. The ghosts of children were said to appear frequently at these seances. The Wilbur children were believed to be psychic, and local residents said they could communicate with the ghosts of children. While records and gravestones claim that 4 Wilbur grandchildren died from a diphtheria epidemic after the Wilburs moved from the home, residents insisted that they died at the Swift mansion and were buried there. The home was abandoned in 1901, and teenagers almost immediately began taking trips to the site, daring each other to enter the infamous haunted home. When Reverend Sprunger moved to the property, he did not utilize the abandoned mansion for his new orphanage. Instead, he attempted to build a new self-sustaining religious community on the property. He and his co-workers were Bible-believing, devout Christians. The boys' schoolhouse contained a chapel which was used to hold frequent religious ceremonies. The orphanage had a maximum capacity of 120 children, and it was frequently filled to capacity. Boys lived at a farm called the Hughes Farm, and girls lived at the Howard Farm. The orphanage also housed a small printing press used to print their own school books, religious texts, and a newspaper called Light of Hope. But rumors of darkness, abuse, malnutrition, and despair soon plagued the Light of Hope orphanage. Orphan children frequently ran away from the home, often wading through the Vermilion River to escape to the nearby city of Vermilion. The children told horrific stories of abuse, neglect, and even slave labor. The children were said to eat a diet of calves' lungs, hog heads, and sick cattle, if they were fed at all. Corn was boiled in the same pot used to boil soiled underwear. And although there were cows on the farm, it was said that the children only got butter once a week, and they very rarely could use common kitchen items such as salt, pepper, and sugar. The children's rooms were infested with rats and mice. On occasion, rats crawled onto the beds and bit children while they slept. It was reported there was only one bathtub for the boys, which they were allowed to use once every 2 weeks and had to use the same water. Children told other stories of Sprunger and the farmhands beating them with a strap until raw welts appeared on their bodies. Sprunger would also rent out the orphans to neighboring farmers for labor. Illnesses and disease were alleged to be treated only by prayers. The children didn't receive much schooling either. So here's where some of the local legends got intertwined into the legend of Gore Orphanage. Back in 1908, a disaster took place in the town of Collinwood, which was on the east side of Cleveland, about 40 miles east of Vermilion. A horrendous fire took hold of a school there in Collinwood, and 176 elementary school students were burned or trampled to death when they became trapped in a stampede situation and couldn't escape. The students began running down the stairs to the exit after the fire alarm was sounded, but the front stairwell was blocked by flames. According to witnesses, the children at the front broke from the lines and tried to fight their way back to the floor above, while those who were coming down shoved them back into the flames below. The students who made it to the rear exit found it locked. Outside rescuers unlocked it, but found that it opened inward, so it was impossible to push the doors open against the forces of dozens of desperate bodies trying to get out. The fire swept through the hall, springing from one child to another, catching their hair and clothing on fire. Not surprisingly, the cries of the children were said to be dreadful and haunting. The school's janitor, a German-American named Herder, was accused of setting the blaze, even though he lost 4 children in the fire and was badly burned trying to rescue one of them. For a brief time, he was detained in protective custody to keep the townspeople from lynching him. The horrific tale of this event is thought to have been relocated when families of the Collinwood area moved further west of Cleveland. Some historians believe the horrid memories of such an event were too disturbing for Collinwood residents to bear and were thus, quote, relocated, unquote, outside the area. Now, I'm not sure about this theory, as it's just as likely that a century of urban legends passed around without internet verification can certainly generate new, hybrid stories that are based on several events. If the earlier theory is correct, though, what better place for the terrifying memories to land upon than the already legendary site of Swift's Hollow and Gore Orphanage? In fact, the tragedy brought about the end of the town of Collinwood. As a result of the fire, unable to sufficiently guarantee fire safety resources for its residents, voters approved an annexation of Collinwood into Cleveland within 2 years of the fire. I recall that another part of this legend was that the inability of the children to escape the orphanage because the doors opened in rather than out was the reason that fire codes today now require all exit doors to open outward. I recall this being told as part of the legend, but never did find any mention of it in the documents I found. So back to the Light of Hope Orphanage. Mr. Sprunger died there of a stroke on September 28, 1911, and the doors of the orphanage permanently closed in July of 1916 after years of financial troubles and ultimate bankruptcy. Today, the Hughes House is all that remains of the Sprunger property. Part of the orphanage buildings burned, and the rest were torn down. The children who resided at the orphanage were dispersed throughout the community or returned to relatives or guardians. The long nightmare was over for the children of the Gore Orphanage. Many were too afraid or too traumatized to recount the conditions they went through at the institution. The few that had nowhere else to go were taken back to Indiana by Mrs. Sprunger, exactly 13 years after the orphanage first opened. Mrs. Sprunger remained in Indiana until her death in 1953. Swift's Hollow is the location most often visited by those seeking a taste of the supernatural today. A graffiti-covered sandstone column marks the entrance of the area, which contains the foundations of this once splendid mansion. Today, all that remains of the Swift Mansion are sandstone blocks from its foundation. Located way back in the woods, these remnants are now scrawled with graffiti left behind by curious visitors. They stand in the forest like trail markers for anyone that dares to seek an experience of the legend of the Gore Orphanage. You've been listening to Great Lakes True Crime. Follow us on Facebook or Twitter by searching for Great Lakes True Crime. Our Twitter handle is @GreatLakesCrime. And if you would, please leave a positive review for us. It's very helpful. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.